Hello. I don't know exactly what this video is going to be about, and to tell you the truth, most of the videos I make, I don't know what they're going to be about, and sometimes I rewatch them and I say, well, I said that. you know, and I don't want to take anything back, that's not what I'm doing, but, I just go off the top of my head, my heart, and I tell you how I feel, and I have a lot of background, and I have been through a lot of experiences, and, you know, I draw on that, like I'm sure you do. So, I like to talk about the Masons, the Illuminatis, or whatever you want to call the people running this world, and whether you believe they eat babies or have sex with children, you know, you know. And if they are, don't worry about it. I'm sure you don't want to feed them your baby, but or your daughter or your son, but do what you can to keep them away from them and all that. But if they're gonna pay, they're gonna pay dearly for what they've done. I think they're devil worshippers, and for the most part, that's the reason for the video. Because they are devil worshippers. They do live in the occult, and you know, now you look at small cults, and they say, like the David Koresh of Waco, Texas, and the ones where they committed suicide in the bed, expecting to jump on a spacecraft or a comet in California. I don't remember the name of the organization or the guy who was running it, but or Jonestown, drink the Kool-Aid. They point out these kinds of people, and usually, like those circumstances that I'm discussing, they're beyond the pale. They're not what you would consider normal, um, but and these cult members that I'm talking about, the Illuminates, the Masons, the Deep State, they they do the same things as those other ones, but they do it quietly. They get away with it for an extent, for a certain amount of time, and then they don't, you know. And like Epstein was a big, they don't, and he's bringing down a lot of people. But you gotta remember, Epstein and all the people that are in his list, uh, they're still part of the puppet world. Trump is a puppet, Bibi is a puppet, Netanyahu, he's a puppet, uh, Putin's a puppet, Putin's a major puppet. But the ones that are pulling the puppet strings and the ones that are in the black outfit in the puppet show, they're not on Epstein's list. And if they were, you would never find out about it. It's gone. And so it's like there, that's all the Epstein list people, like the movie stars or the religious people or the banking people that he had on his list. They're all hanging fruit. They're all low hanging fruit. The real fruit is never caught. And it's not on that list. And they might have bought Epstein all the things that he had: the plane, the island, the car. Because Epstein didn't work. He didn't invent anything or create a company. So they bought him all these things so he could catch all these low-hanging fruit and do what he did with them and blackmail them and all that. So I don't think there's not another Epstein somewhere else with another name and another island, and it doesn't stop because Epstein got caught. It's either they want to shut me up, but what I'm trying to get at is, they are devil worshippers, but even as devil worshippers, they have to follow rules. They have to follow rules of the covenant. David Koresh followed rules. Uh, Jones follow rules. Uh, Manson follow rules. You know. So, I mean, yeah, we know about the ultimate rule: drink the Kool-Aid and die. That was the ultimate rule. But there were a lot of rules structured into his system that later on made news. But the biggest news is drinking the Kool-Aid. That's the one that got the headline. But and lives on to today. But uh, they have rules, and they have to follow those rules. And if they don't follow the rules, they get taken out. You know, you would say Jones broke some of the rules that he had, and that's why they were closing in on him, and why everybody had to drink the Kool-Aid before they got arrested and before they got shut down. And the same go for Koresh and all that. So, you know, I just, I'm not telling you these things so you get mad and riot in the streets or anything like that. Be kind, because the rules you follow as a follower of God and a follower of good is to be kind, even to those evil people, even as they're eating babies or having sex with them. I'm not saying let them, but be kind. Always be kind. Now, I'm not saying like a priest that was very kind as he was molesting your son at the altar. That's not kind. He wasn't being the priest wasn't being kind. The priest was part of the occult, part of the evil. But you're not participating at the altar, and you're not participating in handing your child over to a pedophile. I mean, if you didn't know he was a pedophile, which a lot of that was the case, you're not to blame. You trusted a clergy, and you were taught at a young age that you could trust the clergy. And it's a smack in the face from the church, not you as a parishioner. But, and the church got screwed by its own rules, which attracted the pedophiles because they knew they could run rampant all over the system, in the system that was built by the rules that the primarily Catholic and Jewish are heavily pedophile laden, and you have what you have. But it's not like it was a check the box on the application to become a Catholic priest. Are you a child molester? Check the box. If they didn't check the box, they didn't get hired. That's not the way it was done. They did hire them, but they didn't know, or at least we have to assume they didn't know. I don't want to live in the world where they did know. And I think later on, when they did know, and they just moved into a different city or a different country, and let them continue doing what they were doing, and thinking they wouldn't do it when they got to the new country or city, which was pathetically stupid on their part. You know, I mean, that cannot be. It's not that it can't be forgiven. Everything can be forgiven. Hitler was forgiven. But be kind. Because, you know, you're not in the business of revenge. God handles revenge. Karma handles revenge. And that's the only one. The only one. So your judges in the criminal system, your judges in the family court, they're going to have someone to answer to. And I always say this is a little, sort of a joke, but it's not a joke. When you die, you're going to go see St. Peter. And St. Peter's going to ask you a question. And this question is going to be, why'd you do X, Y, Z to ABC? And you're going to say, well, I was just doing my job. And if that's your answer, as to why you did something very bad to, and I'm only going to bring up things you did very bad, but he's going to push the button, send you to hell, and just before he pushes that button, he's going to say, so am I. I'm just doing my job, sending you to hell. So am I. So, you know, if you don't want to hear so am I, don't do it. Don't do it. Because you can't get your soul back once it's gone. And it's very precious. It should be hailed as the most important thing in your life. You know, and we're taught from the Masons and the Illuminatis and the deep state that it's not important. Because they're devil worshippers. They don't want you to think it's important. You know, it goes against their devil worshiping. You know, those kids that killed themselves in the bed waiting for the comet, they didn't think their soul was worth, you know, they didn't value their soul. Otherwise they wouldn't have killed themselves. So, you know, they, you know, there's a big thing about idol worship. And if you're idol worship, it's the occult. It's devil worship. And don't worship me. I'm asking you to worship me. Don't worship me. Oh, please. People hate me to nth degree. The amount of abuse I've taken. And I still keep going, you know. And I don't want you to worship me. That's not my goal. My goal is for you to worship God. And let God handle your problems. Put all your problems in God's hands. Now, I'm not going to say that you're going to like everything God does or has to say, you know, because a lot of your problems that you have are there to teach you a lesson, you know, and you have to go through whatever those problems put you through. So if you're in debt, you have to pay off the debt. You have to do whatever it is, work as many hours to pay off that debt, you know, and like a student loan or something like that, you have to pay off your debt. So I'm just saying, not everything bad in your life is there because you did something bad, but it's there. Most everything bad in your life is there for you to learn a lesson. And your soul is different than your brother's soul or your friend's soul, so they all go different things. They all go through different things, you know. I went to college. I got a 4-year degree from Hofstra, and I never paid it. I had like $60,000 in student loans, and they were completely forgiven, gone. I never paid one red cent towards those student loans. Now, that's the way God dealt with my problems. I'm not saying He's going to do that with you, because that lesson I didn't need to learn. That might be a lesson you need to learn. So, you know, don't compare. What happens to me is not what's going to happen to you. So, just stop looking at the grass on the other side of the fence. Because when you get there, it's just as green as the grass on your side. It just looks greener because nobody's touching it. But once you get over there, it's like, oh, it's the same. That's what it is, you know. And you never be mad if someone has a better life than you. Because the word better is the problem. What you consider better might not necessarily be better. He might have a Ferrari, but he goes home and his wife and his kids hate his guts, you know. Or they only want him for his money. And the minute he's broke, he's got divorce papers in his hands, you know. So just because on the surface it looks like they're doing well, like the Illuminatis and the Masons and the deep state, they're billionaires, trillionaires, and believe me, Trump is a billionaire, Musk is a billionaire, and these Illuminatis and these deep states have more money than the Musk will ever have. And you won't read about them in the newspaper, and you won't read about the wealth that they have in the newspaper. It's all hidden. It's all in corporate paper or commercial paper. You'll never find it. It's in a different country where they don't report, you know. So, but even though they have that money, they could be completely and utterly miserable. And that's why they're making your life miserable, because they're miserable. And like I said, God's in the business of revenge. Every dollar they steal, every person they hurt, it's gonna come back to haunt them in a very bad way. And whatever you could do, want to hurt them physically or find out who they are in the first place, that's not easy. But if you found out who they were, are you gonna hurt? You're gonna hurt someone. Uh, God's gonna do much worse, much, much, much worse. You won't even, you won't even be able to touch it. What He does, and you won't see it. But believe me, it's done. Just like you didn't see me get my student loans written off, but it happened. I, I don't have to pay. Nobody's chasing me for money, and just because you didn't see it doesn't mean it didn't happen. You know, and I didn't have to do anything. I think I filled out one piece of paper, signed it, and sent it back, and that was the end of $60,000 or $70,000 in loans. So, which would have been tremendously more with the interest later on. But it's zero now. And even if I win the lottery, they can't come back at me for the money, and they can't get it. So it's gone. It's a debt that's over. But God knew. God didn't want me to go to school to become an accountant. God sent me to school to learn about money, to learn about economics, to learn about society, and all the things I talked to you about. I didn't learn them in school. I learned the basics in school. I learned the ABCs of economics. But I through my life and through my studies out of school, because when you quit school, you don't stop learning. You don't stop studying. You just do it in a different way. You don't do it in a classroom. You don't take a test. You know. But life itself is a test, and then you learn a lesson. Right? I learned a lot of lessons, and that's what I'm trying to teach you. And you might want what I have, uh, but you don't want to go through what I went through to get it. I can promise you that. You don't want to go through it. You don't want to. I'll go in for 20 years of torture to get where he is. And I'll tell you what, you can go in for 20 years of torture and you still won't have what I have. Because it was longer than 20 years. And the way I was as a child, look, I skipped kindergarten. They put me in kindergarten for a week and said, yo, you can't be here. And they put me right in first grade. They gave me a choice. My mother walked me down the block and said, Jay, he said, you can go back to school and you'll be in first grade, right this year. Or you can take the year off and go back to school and you'll be in first grade. Now, me being a child, I wanted to go to school. Who doesn't as a child want to go to school and be with a bunch of kids? So I was like, next Monday, I want to go to first grade, and I want to go to school. So that's what I did. But I never went to kindergarten. And, it's just, I don't think any of you can say that. And even if you could, you still, 20 years of torture with that as your base, you're still not going to be me when you grow up. There's a whole lot more that goes into me that you are clueless about. Mm, confirmation. So, and that humming sound is my fan. And I'm sorry if it bothers you. I tried to turn it down a little bit. I don't know how much it affects. It doesn't sound like I turned it down that much from what I'm hearing. But it keeps the background noise. I have trains outside my window, and you don't hear the trains, you hear the sound. So if it's annoying, I'm sorry, but I don't want to annoy you. I'm just trying to block out some background noise. That's all.